Rob Lowe's name has been woven into Hollywood lore for decades, stirring up fascination and curiosity in equal measure. With striking features and an undeniable magnetism, he charmed audiences from the moment he stepped onto the big screen. But behind that star power lies a roller coaster life story, filled with both triumphant achievements and moments so low that they threatened to overshadow his success. In the pantheon of 1980s teen idols, Lowe stood out for his chiseled cheekbones and laser blue eyes, but even that captivating allure couldn't protect him from heartbreak, scandal, or the pitfalls of fame. Rob Lowe was born on March 17, 1964, in Charlottesville, Virginia, to a teacher mother and a trial lawyer father. His parents' relationship was turbulent and ultimately led to divorces that put young Rob and his brother Chad on a path of constant change. When Lowe's mother remarried, she relocated her family to the bright lights of California, chasing new beginnings, but also setting the stage for her son's destiny as an entertainer. Landing in the heart of Los Angeles was like stepping into a dream for Lowe. Here were the studios, the directors, and the ever-present hum of possibility. By day, he was simply another kid navigating adolescence, but by night, he found himself increasingly drawn to the glittering promise of a screen career. Though he carried himself with a certain easy confidence, beneath the surface the young actor was searching for direction and yearning for a spotlight big enough to match his ambitions. Fate nudged him along at every turn. When he enrolled in Santa Monica High School, his circle of friends read like a who's who of future stars. There was Charlie Sheen, whose father, Martin Sheen, had famously survived the madness of Apocalypse Now, and Emilio Estevez, who was also primed for success under the same illustrious family name. Lowe found himself in conversation not just with them, but with a host of other up-and-comers like Sean Penn and Robert Downey Jr., each brimming with a restless energy to take on Hollywood. It was also during this time that Lowe befriended Jennifer Grant, the daughter of iconic actor Cary Grant, adding yet another high-profile connection to his growing web of relationships. Surrounded by talent and ambition, Lowe began to believe that stardom was inevitable if he played his cards right, and play them he did. Though he started modestly, landing minor roles and cameo appearances, his big break felt just around the corner. One early milestone that hinted at his potential was a cameo in a music video for the Go-Go's, where Lowe portrayed a charismatic, handsome high school student. Before long, casting directors took note of Lowe's allure and presence on camera, nudging him into leading roles that showcase more than just his good looks. It was this blend of youth, confidence, and raw talent that propelled him into the heart of the Brat Pack, an elite group of young actors who embodied the voice and style of the 1980s. Their films, often centered on teenage angst and coming-of-age storylines, became cultural landmarks, with Lowe taking prominent spots in hits like The Outsiders and St. Elmo's Fire. As the 1980s progressed, Lowe found himself in the company of a new Hollywood tribe that seemed to have everything: youth, talent, and a fervent fan base. This group was soon to be immortalized in pop culture under a single moniker, the Brat Pack. It was a label that encompassed not just Lowe, but other young actors like Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Anthony Michael Hall, Demi Moore, Molly Ringwald, and a handful of others who frequently appeared in teen dramas or coming-of-age stories, both comedic and deeply angsty. Lowe's performance alongside Demi Moore in St. Elmo's Fire thrust him firmly into the center of this spirited circle. The Brat Pack was notorious for enjoying the good life both on and off the screen. They were the darlings of the moment, Gen X icons, who portrayed restless, idealistic characters while leading similarly freewheeling lifestyles behind the scenes. Tabloids portrayed them as a globe-trotting band of best friends who hop from nightclubs to exclusive parties, always followed by clamoring fans. The exact moment the term Brat Pack was coined can be traced back to a night at the Hard Rock Cafe in New York City. Journalist David Blum tagged along with Lowe and some of his friends in an attempt to capture who these young stars really were when the cameras stopped rolling. The name was a riff on the famed Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and the others who dominated an earlier era of showbiz swagger. Blum described witnessing an endless procession of adoring young women approaching the actors' table, drawn to their magnetic mix of fame and youth. It was more than just a dinner. It was an impromptu fan convention where one girl after another hoped for a picture, an autograph, or maybe even the slim chance of a date. In the center of that whirlwind, Blum saw Lowe enjoying the moment to the fullest. Here was a guy who went from a relatively quiet upbringing to standing under a blinding celebrity spotlight, and he looked like he was more than ready to keep the party going. Part of the reason the Brat Pack myth persisted so strongly was because of the group's sheer visibility. They starred in film after film, movies like The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, Weird Science, Oxford Blues, and so many others that became classics for an entire generation. Often, the roles they played fed directly into the public's perception. They portrayed lively, rebellious teens who questioned authority and pursued romance and thrills. Audiences couldn't help but think that off-camera, these young stars were essentially living out their characters' adventures, only with far fewer rules. Rob Lowe was still riding the wave of newfound stardom when he landed a role in Hotel New Hampshire, a quirky drama that had him sharing screen time with Jodie Foster and Nastassja Kinski. Kinski, the daughter of legendary actor Klaus Kinski, was older, worldly, and carried herself with an alluring European flair that immediately caught Lowe's eye. She was already known for her modeling work and had built her own acting reputation, which, combined with her family name, made her feel almost untouchable, exactly the kind of person who would intrigue a rising Hollywood heartthrob like Rob Lowe. While on set, it didn't take long for sparks to start flying. Lowe found himself drawn into a passionate affair, indulging in the thrill of a hidden romance behind the scenes. Back in Los Angeles, Melissa Gilbert was Lowe's on and off girlfriend who'd stuck with him through all the drama of his earlier projects. She was known to the public as the sweet-faced Laura Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, and the contrast between her wholesome persona and Lowe's rapidly developing bad boy reputation was impossible to miss. One day, Gilbert tried to call Lowe at his hotel, hoping for a simple chat that might ease her concerns about his fidelity. Instead, the operator gave her a soul-crushing jolt of truth. If she wanted to reach Lowe, she could find him in Kinski's room. Just like that, the facade of their relationship crumbled. Enraged and devastated, Gilbert didn't just stew at home. She jumped on a plane and flew to confront him face to face, determined to catch him in the act. Gilbert's arrival caused precisely the kind of uproar you'd expect. When she finally cornered Lowe, all his usual charm and smooth talking couldn't hide what was going on. He had no valid excuse for being shacked up with Kinski, and everyone on the set seemed to know it. Unwilling to lose him outright, Gilbert decided she'd do whatever it took to patch things up. She booked herself into the same hotel, and the two cloistered themselves away for a marathon 15-hour session of shouting, crying, apologizing, more shouting, and, reportedly, making love. The emotional roller coaster left both of them exhausted, but somehow they emerged from that room feeling as if they'd reconciled. It might have looked like a victory, but the cracks were already too deep to simply plaster over. Despite Gilbert's efforts, Lowe showed no sign of settling down. His star was rising, and with fame came limitless dating possibilities. Fueling the fire was his own competitive streak, which he seemed to apply as much to his love life as he did to landing acting roles. For a brief moment, he even romanced Princess Stephanie of Monaco, a bona fide royal who happened to be Grace Kelly's daughter. The idea of an American heartthrob hooking up with actual royalty only intensified the media spotlight. But none of these affairs were just passing flings in Lowe's mind. He turned womanizing into a kind of sport, bragging years later about stealing Nastassja Kinski and potentially other women from John Taylor, the bassist of the iconic 80s band Duran Duran. If Hollywood was a club, Lowe acted like the VIP who could stroll in any time and leave with whomever he liked, racking up conquests as if collecting trophies. The list of women who found themselves linked to Lowe over the years was dizzying. It included Fawn Hall, famous or infamous for her involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal, along with actor Marlee Matlin, who captured hearts in Children of a Lesser God. Another name that surfaced was Winona Ryder, the 80s teen idol who starred in Heathers. And then there was Cornelia Guest, once dubbed the debutante of the decade. If that weren't enough, rumors circulated that Lowe had affairs with practically every leading lady he ever worked with. But at the center of this hurricane of speculation was Melissa Gilbert, clinging to a relationship that seemed to be falling apart piece by piece. Lowe's life had become a neon-lit carnival of temptations, and trying to hold him to any standard of fidelity was turning into an exercise in frustration. Things got even more complicated when Lowe was cast in About Last Night, an edgy Brat Pack romance that took on issues of modern dating and casual hookups. Worried about his own inclinations, Lowe decided it might be wise to keep Gilbert close by. He orchestrated an audition for her with director Ed Zwick, hoping she'd land the female lead and maybe shield him from on-set temptations. But acting isn't just about who you know, and the role ultimately went to Demi Moore. According to Gilbert, Zwick told her, in no uncertain terms, that Lowe and Moore simply looked too good together on screen to pass up. As if being turned down wasn't painful enough, she had to watch as Moore stepped into the part that she had wanted, acting opposite the man she was desperately trying to keep on the straight and narrow. True to form, once filming began, Lowe and Moore ended up having a one-night stand. Moore, years later, wrote in her memoir that she was battling substance abuse issues at the time and only vaguely recalled the encounter. Lowe, ever the smooth operator, refused to dish out any juicy details. He told people who asked that a gentleman never kisses and tells, neatly sidestepping guilt while maintaining a sense of intrigue. It was a line that might have worked on the tabloids, but probably did little to comfort Gilbert. When she got wind of Lowe's fling with Moore, she seethed with anger, determined to find her own form of payback. At the time, Gilbert was stuck in Texas, filming a movie about horses, hardly the place to find an A-list actor for a quick revenge affair. She scanned the set for potential candidates and came up short among the major cast members. Finally, she settled on a different option, a third assistant director who showed enough interest to be a decent stand-in for Retribution. Word traveled back to Lowe that Gilbert was hooking up with someone else. But while Gilbert had flown across the country in a rage when she discovered his betrayal, Lowe's response was shockingly subdued. Instead of dropping everything to confront her, he simply wrote a letter expressing remorse and a desire to fix things. An old-school move that suggested he didn't think the problem was urgent enough for any grand dramatic gesture. Whether it was the romance of the letter or lingering affection, Gilbert relented once again, and the pair reunited. Of course, anyone watching from the outside could see that these back and forth on and off theatrics were spiraling out of control. Each new indiscretion dragged them deeper into a cycle of heartbreak, jealousy, and frantic reunions. Their emotional marathon after the Kinski incident hadn't resolved the underlying issues. Lowe's voracious appetite for adventure and validation drove him from one affair to another, while Gilbert's willingness to endure heartbreak in the hope of making things work just prolonged the inevitable. Some might say it was young love twisted by fame, or perhaps it was simply two people who had no idea how to handle the amplified temptations of Hollywood. Looking back on this chaotic period, it's clear that the complexities of Lowe's love life went far beyond mere tabloid fodder. They reveal how disorienting sudden stardom can be, especially for someone determined to savor every thrill that comes his way. It wasn't just about who Lowe dated, royalty, starlets, or everyday fans. It was about the lengths he would go to keep chasing novelty. Meanwhile, Melissa Gilbert's attempts to salvage their relationship, from storming a hotel room to giving him yet another second chance, spoke volumes about the emotional toll that kind of lifestyle can take on a person. Their story was emblematic of an entire decade in Hollywood, a time when the parties seemed endless and boundaries were easily crossed. For Lowe, the late-night confessions, jealous fits, and dramatic reconciliations were all part of a bigger saga, one that would eventually force him to reckon with who he wanted to be once the cameras turned off and the next temptation came knocking. And for Melissa Gilbert, the question was how many more times she could give in before the heartbreak finally became too much to bear. Rob Lowe was no stranger to the spotlight when he stepped onto the Oscars stage in 1989, decked out like Prince Charming and ready to serenade an actress dressed as Snow White. By that point, he'd already experienced both the perks and perils of being an 80s heartthrob, but nothing could have prepared him for the fallout that would follow this ill-fated musical number. Critics and audiences alike had a field day calling the entire routine cringeworthy and labeling Lowe's singing voice about as flat as could be. In a decade bursting with big hair and even bigger show tunes, you'd think a star of his stature could pull off a campy fairy tale opening, but the performance became infamous for all the wrong reasons. It went down in Academy Awards history as one of the worst starts to any ceremony, an unenviable distinction that clung to Lowe for years afterward. However, as dismal as that night might have seemed, it turned out to be just a warm-up for the tsunami of scandal about to slam into his life. Around this same time, Lowe developed a keen interest in politics, perhaps an unexpected pivot for a guy best known for starring in teen dramas and racking up jaw-dropping tabloid headlines. But at only 24, he was excited to prove he had substance beyond the pretty face and the party rep. He threw himself into Michael Dukakis's 1988 presidential campaign, hoping to merge star power with civic engagement. Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, was the Democratic hopeful aiming to unseat George H.W. Bush. Having a Brat Pack star rallying voters must have seemed like a strategy worth exploring, though it was arguably a gamble. Lowe came with fanfare, but also with a well-deserved reputation for living on the edge. Ultimately, that gamble did not pay off for either the candidate or the eager actor. Dukakis would famously lose the election to Bush, while Lowe walked away with a colossal scandal that dwarfed even his Oscars misfire. During a campaign stop in Atlanta, Lowe decided to cap off a long day of political events by inviting two of his female admirers back to his hotel room. He was still young, wealthy, and flush with the sense that he could ride his charm past any consequences. Even so, the decision to videotape their intimate encounter was ill-advised at best and catastrophic at worst. When he woke up the next morning, possibly nursing one of his trademark hangovers, Lowe discovered two unsettling things. The young women had vanished, and so had the tape. Now, in 2023, such footage would likely surface online within minutes, blowing up on every social media platform. Back then, however, the idea of a stolen celebrity tape was brand new territory, and no one was entirely sure how destructive it might be. As it turned out, it was plenty destructive. The situation took a turn from merely embarrassing to downright life-ruining when it came to light that one of the girls was only 16 years old. The legal and moral ramifications were obvious. Lowe found himself facing the possibility of serious allegations, and the media sank its teeth into the story. Suddenly, he wasn't just the Brat Pack hunk or the guy who botched the Oscars tune. He was the punchline of every late-night joke and a pariah among studio executives. Worst of all, Al Goldstein, known for marketing racy and explicit material, got his hands on the tape and started selling copies for a modest $30, a sum that, in exchange, offered a front row seat to the actor's most humiliating moment. Fans who'd once plastered Lowe's face on their bedroom walls now viewed him with disappointment, if not outright disgust. Mainstream movie roles, once so plentiful, vanished almost overnight. It would be easy to imagine Lowe spiraling so deep into despair that he'd never recover. And in many ways, that's exactly what happened. At first, he'd always been a drinker, accustomed to partying during his time with the Brat Pack, and now he had every reason to drown his sorrows. His reputation was in tatters, and it seemed uncertain if he'd ever get another major role again. Yet, in the midst of this meltdown, fate stepped in to offer a lifeline. Lowe reconnected with Cheryl Burkhoff, a talented makeup artist he'd first met some years earlier, on a blind date arranged by Emilio Estevez. The timing was unexpectedly perfect. Lowe was wounded enough to see he needed a major life overhaul, and Burkhoff was steadfast enough to help him implement it. For the first time in what felt like forever, he found someone who could see past his star status and encourage him toward the kind of stability he'd always lacked. Still, building a new life required real sacrifices. By 1991, Lowe had grudgingly accepted that alcohol wasn't just a party favor for him, it was a problem. The videotape catastrophe had stripped away any illusions he might have had about being able to handle his liquor and lead a scandal-free life. Burkhoff, for her part, made it clear she wouldn't stand by while he continued to sabotage himself. In a move both heartbreaking and necessary, she issued an ultimatum. She wouldn't marry him until he got sober. Faced with losing this woman he deeply cared about, Lowe took a leap of faith and entered rehab. For an actor who'd lived in the fast lane since his teens, stepping away from that lifestyle was daunting, but it was also liberating. After emerging sober, he and Burkhoff wasted no time, tying the knot in 1991 and starting the next phase of his life. A phase without the haze of booze and late-night scandal. Of course, sobriety was a huge victory, but this was Rob Lowe. Despite wanting to keep his life calmer, drama still seemed to follow him. And ironically, it wasn't self-inflicted this time. It was the chaotic energy of Hollywood calling him back. Though mainstream film roles had evaporated, television offered a shot at redemption. In 1999, Lowe was cast in Aaron Sorkin's new political drama, The West Wing, playing Sam Seaborn, a bright-eyed speechwriter with big ideals. The role was a perfect fit and a nod to Lowe's real-life political leanings. Audiences were captivated by his performance and the show's intricate portrayal of White House life. Suddenly, a guy once discarded by the industry was raking in critical praise and even earned a Primetime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. A major perk for Lowe was getting to work alongside Martin Sheen, who played the fictional President Josiah Bartlet. Sheen was more than just a Hollywood heavyweight. He was also a longtime father figure to Lowe, dating back to the actor's adolescence in Malibu, where he'd bonded with Sheen's sons, Charlie and Emilio. Being on set with Sheen was a full-circle moment. The once wayward teen idol had come under the same professional roof as the man who'd inspired him all those years ago. His chemistry with the cast, Allison Janney, Bradley Whitford, and others, proved he was still a force to be reckoned with. A reminder that a single misstep, or even a series of them, doesn't have to define a career forever. In a sense, The West Wing was both a homecoming and a second chance. Where once his name was synonymous with scandal, now it was associated with earnest political drama, a show applauded for its intelligence and wit. Fans welcomed him back with cautious optimism, perhaps relieved to see a star from their 80s nostalgia get his life in order and thrive in a new domain. The press, always hungry for a redemption story, found Rob Lowe's comeback hard to resist. Here was the same man who'd nearly wrecked an entire presidential campaign with one disastrous night in Atlanta, now playing a key role in a fictional presidency beloved by millions. Life, as they say, can be stranger than fiction, and Lowe's journey was a glowing example of that quirk of fate. Yet for all his success in the new millennium, the imprint of his earlier misadventures never fully faded. Old jokes about Snow White, the notorious videotape, and wild nights with the Brat Pack still surfaced from time to time, reminding him and everyone else how fragile a Hollywood reputation can be. The difference now was that Lowe had found a firmer footing. He was sober, committed to his marriage, and determined not to let the ghosts of his past define him. In interviews, he spoke candidly about the perils of young fame, acknowledging that the privileges he enjoyed came with hidden traps. While he never disavowed his Brat Pack days, he embraced them as part of who he was. He was keen to show that he'd evolved beyond the guy who hopped from scandal to scandal and woke up with a headache and regrets. Ultimately, the Rob Lowe saga from the late 80s through the 90s reads like a cautionary tale merged with a Hollywood fairy tale, complete with a nearly disastrous downfall and a triumphant rebound. From his catastrophic performance at the 1989 Oscars to the near-career-ending tape scandal, from late-night campaign romps to rehab and redemption, he's lived the kind of storyline that could fill multiple tabloid covers, and it certainly did. But through it all, he managed to realign his priorities, find genuine love, and land a role that let him shine in a whole new way. If anyone needed proof that even the worst PR nightmare can be overcome, Rob Lowe's life might just be the ultimate evidence. And if you asked him, he'd probably tell you that hitting rock bottom was what finally propelled him to make the changes he should have made all along, leading him to a future that wasn't just about looking good in front of a camera, but actually feeling good about the person he'd become when the spotlight dimmed. Rob Lowe's career has always been a tapestry of dazzling highs and calamitous lows, and that was never more apparent than when he joined the West Wing. The role of Sam Seaborn was initially conceived as a central figure, and in the early days, Lowe seemed poised to be the undisputed lead of a major network drama. But as the show gained momentum, it recruited heavy hitters like Martin Sheen and Stockard Channing, and the writers quickly shifted focus toward those more established names. Lowe, feeling sidelined from his own vehicle, eventually decided he'd had enough and walked away. Although many fans missed him when he left, controversy continued to dog him wherever he went. A new TV project called Lion's Den soon beckoned, and once again, drama flared when Lowe urged singer-songwriter Jewel to do a guest spot. She was game for the role, but balked when the script called for an on-screen kiss. At first, the producers tried to convince her it was crucial to the storyline, and though she eventually gave in, She later demanded that the footage be cut entirely. For years, nobody could quite figure out her reasoning. It only came to light about a decade later, at a Comedy Central roast, that she apparently knew where his mouth had been and didn't want any part of it. Little did Lowe know he'd soon have more serious distractions to handle. His brief stint starring in tourism ads for the state of California brought him into the orbit of then-Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, as it turned out, would have his own scandal with a housekeeper not long afterward. Whether that influenced Lowe at all is anyone's guess, but soon the Lowe household found itself at the center of a domestic meltdown. Rob and his wife, Cheryl Burkhoff, sued 3 former household employees, a pair of nannies and a chef, claiming that the staff had violated confidentiality agreements. Yet instead of neatly tying up a breach of contract, those lawsuits triggered 2 nasty countersuits from the nannies. The allegations set Hollywood rumor mills ablaze. One nanny accused Lowe of inappropriate touching and indecent exposure, while another claimed Burkhoff made a racially charged remark about her boyfriend. For a time, Lowe couldn't do an interview without a publicist stepping in to halt any discussion of the matter. Then, as everyone braced for the worst, the script took a surprising turn. A judge dismissed 2 of the charges against Lowe and his wife, and all remaining lawsuits were quietly dropped. Whether hush money changed hands remains a mystery, but soon enough the case just evaporated. All this might have stayed buried if not for the 2015 Comedy Central roast, where Jewel finally revealed why, all those years ago, she'd flat out refused to kiss Lowe. It boiled down to that infamous tape from the late 80s, the one involving a teenage girl in Atlanta that nearly destroyed his career. Jewel's remark about knowing where his mouth had been was a reference to that scandal. The tape had haunted him before, but hearing it thrown at him in front of a live audience reopened old wounds. Lowe tried to defend himself by saying he was grateful for the experience, claiming it had effectively forced him to get serious about his life. That statement only made things worse because he completely glossed over the impact on the underage girl, showing zero concern for any laws he may have broken. His words sounded self-serving, and to many viewers it felt like Lowe was shrugging off a deeply problematic chapter in his past. Of course, dealing with scandal was nothing new for Rob Lowe. Years earlier, he'd been one of the biggest teen idols in Hollywood, earning a spot in People magazine's top 10 teen idols of all time, alongside icons like Elvis, James Dean, and Michael Jackson. He's on record saying that he's proud to share such legendary company, which is understandable. Who wouldn't be? But while fans adored him for his jawline, blue eyes, and charm, his personal life often resembled a never-ending soap opera. In his 80s heyday, particularly when he was dating Melissa Gilbert, fidelity didn't seem to be part of his vocabulary. More than once, he got caught stepping out on her when she was away shooting movies of her own. One especially disastrous outing saw him waltzing into a famous Hollywood eatery with another woman, only to spot comedian Joan Rivers, a notorious gossip, sitting nearby. That very evening, Rivers planned to interview him on The Tonight Show, and of course she didn't hold back. Lowe tried to brace himself by warning Gilbert ahead of time, but when Rivers called him out on national television, there was little he could say in his own defense. Somehow, in the middle of these constant betrayals, Lowe actually proposed to Gilbert. Their relationship was so fiery and chaotic that friends doubted it would lead to anything lasting. But she said yes, possibly hoping an engagement would bring stability. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant. For a moment, it seemed like they could create a real future together, until Lowe's reaction turned ice cold. He flat out panicked at the idea of impending fatherhood, ended the engagement on the spot, and left Gilbert reeling. Devastatingly, she lost the baby soon afterward and moved on, swearing off the possibility of a happily ever after with Lowe. As if that heartbreak weren't enough, a new drama arose years later, when Lowe released his memoirs. In the first book, he failed to mention that he'd ever proposed to Gilbert, and in the second, he omitted any reference to her at all. Furious, Gilbert publicly compared his writing to Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, calling the children's classic more profound than any of Lowe's autobiographical insights. Despite all this turbulence, Lowe somehow managed to find a path to a respectable career renaissance. He snagged roles on beloved TV series, from The West Wing to Parks and Recreation, reminding audiences that underneath the layers of scandal lay a genuine talent. On The West Wing, he might have felt overshadowed by bigger names, but he still delivered performances that showcased his knack for combining humor, sincerity, and a certain confident swagger. Later in Parks and Recreation, he expertly parodied his own image as a perpetually upbeat, health-obsessed civil servant. People grew to appreciate his comedic timing as much as they once adored his chiseled features. Yet even with this late career success, he never fully shook off the controversies that had dogged him. The rumored hush money for the nannies, the teenage tape, the meltdown with Melissa Gilbert. Every time things seemed to settle, something else bubbled up to remind fans of his complicated legacy. His comedic cameo in the California tourism ads alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger felt like an odd but amusing footnote, as if both men were unwittingly winking at their shared histories of tabloid fodder indiscretions. So when we look at Rob Lowe's roller coaster existence, from the meltdown that made the West Wing too cramped for him, to the hush-hush nanny lawsuits, to the meltdown that ended his engagement to Melissa Gilbert, it's impossible not to wonder how many lives this Hollywood cat has left. For all the heartbreak and near-career death experiences, he has a remarkable track record for walking away relatively unscathed, eventually turning every disaster into another line in his memoirs. And, love him or hate him, you have to admit, the man knows how to keep us watching.